How are you?
Hi, how are you?
Good. Thanks for having me on.
Yes, thank you we're so excited, Liz. I'm
Yeah.
Allison, one of the owners at Fabled.
Hi. Hi, Allison.
Hey Liz, I'm Elizabeth
Hi.
Barnhill. So good to meet you finally.
Nice to meet another Elizabeth.
I know. What's your middle name?
Janet.
Janet. Okay, I'm an Ann.
Is my great grandmother's name.
Oh, well, I was named after my great grandmother, Elizabeth Ann, and there's been an Elizabeth in our family for generations and generations. So my daughter's Mary Elizabeth, and
Okay. Well, my
tell my
daughter's
kids,
Anne, funny enough.
oh, I tell my kids somebody's got to take the bullet and name one of their daughters Elizabeth.
Yeah. I know some little ones named Lizzie. It seems like a common enough name among kids of
That's that
Janet.
is that's my only nickname that only a few of my friends can call me.
Mhm. Me too.
But I am Liz at Starbucks and anywhere people have to spell my name because I
Yeah.
used to say my name and they'd look at me like
Right.
so. My daughter and I both go by Liz at Starbucks.
Nice.
Oh, funny. I did not know that.
Oh
That's really funny. Well, did you know that my middle name is Elizabeth? I love
Oh,
that we're
yeah, I
all
knew that.
and then my daughter's middle name is Elizabeth
nice.
too. So we're keeping the tradition.
Yeah.
It's a
That's
regal name, of course. So yeah. We're so excited to have you, Liz. This has been something that we've dreamed about, and this book is incredible, and I can't wait to talk to you about it.
great.
We'll wait for just a few minutes. We have a few more people joining us. We had like over 200 people, 250 people, I think, sign up for this, which is amazing. And then we record it and send it 24 hours later. So sometimes people will just view it at their convenience. Um,
Excellent.
but what's fun, and I know a lot of authors enjoy, is that we get to talk about spoilers. We get to talk about the
Good.
end, everything. So I don't know. Do you have that opportunity ever with other book clubs?
I've had a few such conversations. Yeah, but you're right that they're definitely the minority of conversations that I have about the book. Normally it's spoiler free.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's been fun to watch authors just kind of be like, this is so weird, or this is so nice to like not have to hold it all
Right.
back.
I
So,
do.
but yeah.
Liz, I was trying to remember. I do remember that Long Bright River was my first five-star read of the year. Was it
Mhm.
2019 or 2020?
2020, it was January of 2020, right before the world shut down.
Yeah.
So it was, I remember I about half my tour was canceled for Long Bright River, which was not a I mean, obviously it was not a great time for the world, but I wasn't upset that the end of the tour was canceled because I had a very little baby at home.
Oh,
My
really?
son was not yet one, and so it
Oh,
was sort of like
sorry.
a mixed a blessing, in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah, you kind of got that in there right before the worst of it, though. That's great.
I know I have friends who published books in March of 2020 or April of 2020, and it was so rough because there was no book coverage in those months.
Mhm.
They really had an uphill battle. So I feel lucky that my book came out. It had a little runway right before everything changed.
We kind of it's interesting. Fabled opened in 2019, and we because of COVID, because authors were stuck at home, we started doing this
Yeah,
online book club.
yeah.
And it if I don't know if it would have happened without COVID, really, but it's
Yeah.
been every author was so excited to talk to us,
Mhm.
just because what else are you going to do? And I feel
Yeah.
like we've kind of developed a reputation for this
Mhm.
book club that we have. So it worked out well for us that it's still going strong after all these years.
That's wonderful. Yeah, I know a number of stores had online events and book clubs, and now they've moved back to in person, and I can see kind of both sides to it.
Mhm.
Well, I think we have a lot of people who tune in from all over the world, really, for our book club. So it's kind of
Yeah.
fun to share Fabled with the world.
That's great. That's wonderful.
Well, awesome. Well, we will go ahead and start. Welcome to Fabled's Book Club. If this is your first time being here, I'm Allison, one of the co-owners here at Fabled, and we have Elizabeth, our book buyer, and we're thrilled to have Liz Moore today. We talked about your book briefly during what we call our book review, where we introduce what the best books are in our opinion, in the season coming out. And when we talked about God of the Woods. So many people went crazy. I mean, the chat was just scrolling, and everyone was so excited, which did not surprise me that we had a large sign up for this book club. So we will have the chat open right here. And if you have a question during our time with Liz that you would like to ask, feel free to put it in the chat. You also could put it in the Q&A and we'll try to get to it. Elizabeth and I have prepared some questions for Liz that we will go through, and if we answer your question, then great, and we'll try our best to get to everybody's at the end. The special thing about our book club is spoilers abound. So if you are not done reading this book, please feel free to shut down your computer and come back to it when you're done, because you will have this sent as a recording 24 hours after this ends, and you'll receive it in your email. So do not worry, you will be able to hear all the good things. But wanting to warn you that we will be talking about the ending, we'll be talking about all sorts of things. And if you guys will stick around at the end, we will announce our next book club for next month. So I will let Elizabeth introduce Liz.
All right, so again, we're so thrilled to have Liz with us tonight. Liz Moore is the author of the New York Times bestselling novel, Long Bright River, which was a Good Morning America book club pick and one of Barack Obama's favorite books of the year, as well as the acclaimed novel, Heft and the Unseen World. A winner of the 2014-2015 Rome Prize in Literature, she lives in Philadelphia. And I just was telling Liz that her book, Long Bright River, was my favorite book of the year it came out. And so the second I saw, my publisher rep knew how much I loved that book. So he could not wait to tell me that you had a new book coming out. And that was one of my most anticipated books. Actually, it was the most anticipated book for me this year. And it did not disappoint. It was utterly fantastic, which is so nice when the expectations match the results. So again, we're so thrilled that you're here. Can you kind of, for some of us, of course, I read the book months ago, give us a little bit of a synopsis of the book, and then we'll ask some questions.
Gladly, yeah. The God of the Woods is the story of the wealthy Van Laar family, who are fictional, but in the book they are a family of American bankers who build a mansion in the wilderness of the Adirondack Mountains of upstate New York. And they also build a summer camp just down the hill from that mansion, to which they send their own daughter, Barbara, in the summer of 1975. And she very quickly goes missing from that camp. But the catch is that she's not the first child of theirs to go missing, because 14 years earlier, their son, Bear, also went missing on the same grounds, although not from the camp itself. And so it's kind of a double mystery, moving back and forth in time to determine what happened to both of these children. And there's also sort of an upstairs, downstairs thing happening with the family itself, which has a lot of means, and the working class community nearby, members of which staff the house and the grounds. And the Van Laar family functions as a kind of economy unto itself in this very rural place. So that is my quick summary of the book.
I love the setup for this story. Anytime I tell someone what the book is about, they're like, what? And they want to read it immediately. I would love to hear where the idea from the book came from.
Sure. There were a few different sources of inspiration. I have a long family history in the Adirondack Mountains. So four of my maternal ancestors moved to the Southern Adirondacks from other parts of the northeastern United States in the early 1800s to found farms, very small farms in the Adirondacks. They farmed for about a century after that, and then they were displaced by a government works project, which flooded the river that bordered their farms intentionally. And they moved just south of the Adirondacks, which is where my mother and my grandmother were born and raised. My grandparents built a cabin back near the site of my ancestral home. And that cabin is still in our family, and we go there a lot. I bring my kids there. It's a very important part of our family's, tapestry. And so the place itself, the Adirondack Mountains, is very near and dear to my heart. I've spent a lot of time there. And a lot of the sensory details in the book about the mountains and the lake and the structures therein come from personal experience of the place. The story of there's a secondary character named Jacob Sluder in the novel, who is a serial killer who's kind of like hovering just off screen for much of the book and haunting the imaginations of the campers and the family. He is also based on a real life figure named Robert Garrow, who was a real serial killer in the Adirondacks in the 1970s and was a very big part of my childhood imagination, although I was born just after he died. My parents talked about him. Everybody in the Adirondacks had a close call with him, if you ask them, including like some of my uncle claims that he had a close call with Garrow, and still have cousins in the region who would claim the same. So he was a big figure in everybody's collective imagination, and he inspired part of the book as well.
Amazing.
I kind of laugh that I was born in the summer of 1975, and any book set in that time always talks about a serial killer.
There were so many.
The summer of serial killers.
I know. Something was in the water.
Yes. I know.
Yeah.
Well, so yes, I had heard about this. The serial killer was sort of based on this Robert Garrow. What about the other characters in the book? Are they based on are there any other historical accuracies that were present in the book?
There are a lot of kind of like wealthy families that experienced tragedy in the Adirondacks. The first seed of the novel was actually planted for me when I was on a writing residency at Yaddo, which is an artist colony in Saratoga Springs, which people call the gateway to the Adirondacks. It's just south of the Adirondacks. And it was founded by the Trask family, which too were a wealthy dynastic American family. And very sadly, they lost 4 children in separate ways. And then Spencer Trask, the patriarch, died in a train accident. And when I think about that family, when I think about the Kennedys, I think about families that have a lot of capital, but that endure huge emotional losses. And I think about how loss and death are just about the only thing that even the wealthy can't sort of insulate themselves from completely. And that sort of started me on the path of thinking about the Van Laars and who they are and what they represented, along with a ton of historical research that I did about the creation of the Adirondack Park Preserve and how it really, really benefited the environment of the Adirondacks, because still it's a very well-preserved tract of land after a century of lumbering kind of decimated it. But also it really was formed only after wealthy families in the US discovered it as a kind of like summer playground. And so when suddenly the New York State government came in and said, okay, well, all this land is protected now, unfortunately, there were a lot of working people in the Adirondack Park that suddenly found themselves unable to perform their industry. So it's a very ethically complicated historical episode, and that always really intrigues me and attracts me as a writer of fiction, because I figure there's kind of fertile ground for exploration there in terms of theme.
Wow, absolutely.
Well, talking about the 1970s and females in this book, female roles and expectations in both society and their families, like you have Alice and then you have Judy, and just the vast difference between the two of them. Was the 1970s like an easy time period to highlight these roles as women?
Yeah, I think what's interesting about setting the book in a rural place in 1975 is that there were so many social movements going on in the rest of the country that were sort of like just knocking on the door of the Adirondacks, which is a little bit preserved in time. I spoke to my own cousins who live in the Adirondacks and interviewed them about they're a little bit older than my parents, and so they have very strong memories of the 50s, 60s, 70s in the Adirondacks and what it was like as a place. I also interviewed 2 retired state troopers about what police procedure was in the 1970s in the Adirondacks and some of the difficulties inherent in working in a very rural place. And yeah, I thought it was a very interesting moment to have a young female investigator facing a lot of the challenges that any young woman in a male-dominated industry still faces today, and certainly would have faced then, but also being kind of aware that like the tide was shifting around the country as well. And I think you can see that in Louise as well, who kind of optimistically, almost like reinforcing it for herself, keeps chanting like it's 1975, things are changing, because just she needs them to change, faster than they're changing in her life.
Now, I'd like to deep dive a little more into this, the haves and the have-nots, or I love how you say the upstairs and downstairs people in the story. One thing I was even looking back today and read on page 453, the Hewitt family, how they were going to be able to go off and do, they're very self-reliant, but the Van Laars were so dependent on people like the Hewitts that they wouldn't be able to. But the more I thought about it, I thought, it's really the haves and the have-nots need each other to survive. So I thought that was kind of an interesting thought. And even just thinking about the Van Laars, the men in the Van Laar family, the path of destruction where they were absolutely destroying the lives of the have-nots in order to save their reputation. So what made you decide, what made you so intrigued with this idea of the haves and have-nots in this time period?
I think the Van Laars are representative of a wealthy family that has created its own mythology about itself, but in doing so, their blind spots about the way they rely on the labor of others ultimately kind of leads to their downfall in a lot of ways, because they don't have trusted advisors within the community. The community doesn't trust them. And so all it takes is like one young investigator asking the right person to kind of unravel a case that's been very difficult, that was 14 years earlier, very tightly guarded. And I think the fact that it's 1975 and that young people are coming in from the outside and breathing like fresh air into a pretty cloistered environment is the reason that the case is cracked at all, because she's in a position of speaking with local people and unmonitored by the Van Laars and their allies and things like that. So you're right. I think the local people rely upon the Van Laars for their income, but the Van Laars rely upon the local people for their livelihood, for their survival, literally, in the wilderness. And I think the fact that the local people acknowledge that about the Van Laars, but the Van Laars don't acknowledge that about the local people is really, again, kind of what leads to the Van Laars' downfall.
And thinking again about Alice and just her mental state and the actions that her sister and her husband and then her father-in-law had all these like ingredients for her to have a mental breakdown. And we've heard a little bit from other readers of their like mixed emotions about her, and if they were annoyed by her or they felt sorry for her. How do you feel about Alice? Do you feel sorry for her? Do you feel like she's a victim?
I do, but it took me a long time to come to that conclusion. I think, I don't know much about my characters or my story going into a novel. And with Alice, I did not expect to develop the sympathy that I ended up developing for her when I wrote her opening chapter. I wrote her as somebody who was very hard on her daughter, who did not treat her staff well, who had fully absorbed this sort of rules and regulations around femininity and saw gender in a very kind of like restrictive and binary way. And, I was sort of writing her in I myself was writing her in a pretty restrictive way at first. But then I began to think about her age and how young she would have been when she got married to Peter Van Laar, who was over a decade older than her. And I started to think about perhaps the idea that, why does Alice act like this toward her daughter? Maybe this was how she was treated as a child as well by her mother, and it's all she knows. And, just sort of going back in time, and then really considering I didn't even, when I began to write the book, I didn't know that there would be an earlier mystery. Barbara was the first
Mm.
and only character who disappeared. My initial concept for the book was just the daughter of a wealthy family goes missing from the camp they own. Bear came much later in the writing. And it was when Bear arrived that I began to contemplate the idea that maybe Alice is the way she is in the present because of this horrific incident that she suffered in the past. And then writing the scenes between her and Bear really loosened something in me. It loosened a lot of emotion and sympathy for Alice in me because those were some of the most difficult scenes to write. Being a parent myself, I think I just have a great sadness when I think about Alice, the loss of Alice's son and how she lost him. I think that really humanizes her for me. And I do see her as a victim in a lot of ways. Yeah.
I love a complicated character that way, where you have lots of different feelings about them. I was talking to several readers today who I just said, I'm talking to Liz more tonight. Any questions? And one of the questions that popped up was, there's a thought that maybe Peter is not the father of Barbara. Is there
Mhm.
maybe anything to that? Maybe it was TJ's dad, which would make the relationship between TJ and Barbara as half siblings that much more interesting. So I see a smile on your face. Did that ever occur to you?
It never
No.
did, but that's cool. Maybe
Okay.
I'll take it and run with it. No, I can't say that that did occur to me. But I get
Okay.
it. I get why it's, why the question's there.
Yeah. With a big age difference. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. No, that's a good idea.
Um, being a mother myself too, I think it is when you just hurt for Alice and for the whole situation. And thinking about Barbara as a girl and just the difference between her and Bear, do you think that because she was a girl and not her brother, that it was kind of like a catalyst for her being neglected? Because you reading about Bear and how he's treated by his parents, he was so cherished.
Mhm.
Um, was this the way that Barbara was treated? Do you feel like it was because of the decline of Alice's health, or that even back then that boys are valued more, especially in a wealthy family that you're passing along the family name, valued more than girls in those times?
Yeah, I think the Van Laars are a very male-dominated family, and the women they seek as their partners they seek because of their passivity or their ability to be controlled. And I think Barbara is the exact opposite of any Van Laar woman who's ever been in the family before. And I think she's really shunned because of that difference. I also do think, all the Peters want to produce another Peter. And they get their Peter and then they lose their Peter. And I think by the time that Alice has Barbara, seeing what she is like in the wake of having Barbara and how far gone she is, probably established for her husband that she was not capable or competent. Like she could not have another child after Barbara because she's had suffering from a lot of mental illness at that point. So
Right.
I think that's when they turn their gaze to their godson and think, well, I guess John Paul will take over
Mhm.
the business and he'll be effectively like the male heir and we'll put all of our energy into him.
Well, when I was reading the book, I was thinking, oh my goodness, how in the world were you able to keep all of this straight? So we have these multiple points of view, multiple timelines. How did you manage to keep it all straight? What is your writing process like in a book like this?
I really just write forward as much as I can. If I hit an obstacle or if I lose inspiration for a particular scene or character, I'll just jump to something I'm more interested in writing for a while. In the same book, I mean, in the same world of the book, but a different point of view or a different time period or some sort of backstory that might inform my understanding of the character. But aside from that, I just sort of write in a forward direction until I uh, reach places that I think are right for the narrative. Often I will write in a forward direction and then come to a place that I realize is completely wrong for the book and have to reverse course. And just, I think of it as like going back to the trunk of the tree and like going off in a different direction until I hit a wall there or until it works, you know. So I just write in that way. In terms of keeping track of stuff, I keep a Word document with names and dates and birthdays and dates of death, and I keep it all as just sort of a timeline. And if I change a date at any point, then I do all the math in the moment to change all the other dates. And then I just sit there and I do my Command F and find all those dates and change them all repeatedly. And it's a pretty slow and mechanical the way of writing, but that's what works for me. And it's also why it takes me 4 years to write a book and not 1 year to write a book.
Interesting.
I love the map in the front of the book. I love a map in a book. So I was always excited to turn to the first page and see a map. And I think Elizabeth mentioned to me today that did your version that you read, your advanced copy, did not have the map, correct?
No,
Oh, that's so interesting.
I was
Yeah.
going to ask, did you draw it?
I did draw it. Yeah. I drew the map. First to keep track of things. I drew like a much hastier version of it to just keep track of geography myself. And then I drew a more stylized version of it to submit as part of the manuscript. And then the publisher just liked that it looked very amateur and hand drawn, and they kept it in.
I love it.
I saw a video yesterday for people who listened to it to be able to see what it actually looked like, because all the different sections of the points of view. And I thought, this is one of those books that really is better if you can see it. Well, I feel that way about any literary book because it's just so beautifully written. Somehow it just feels better reading it with my eyes and my ears. But yeah, but I think people who listen to it need to go back and read it visually as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I always wondered whether it would be a challenge to listen to it on audio, but I know a lot of people who have listened to it on audio, so apparently it's possible.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I've been telling people too, like, you need to read this one, you can't listen to it. With camp being the setting, which I was telling Elizabeth, like, I was imagining my own childhood camp when this story was going on, and that being a setting and kind of the lore that follows camp, like scary stories and kids frightening each other. Was that a preferred way? Like, was it kind of a serendipitous way for you to drop kind of red herrings with like Scary Mary or things like the serial killer?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I went to a camp in the Adirondacks, which I always forget to mention when people ask me about my inspiration for this novel, but that might be because I was not a camp person. I went for I was a lot like the Tracy character, where I went when I was relatively older than the other. I mean, I think I went about their age, like 11 or 12, and quickly realized that all the other kids had been there since they were 8 or so, and they had this community that I never fully cracked into. But I do recall all those, the mythology of the camp involving a completely invented, like there was a murder here and there was a child, a whatever here, and there's Bigfoot, and there's, and kids tell each other stories to.
Oh, they totally believe it too. Like,
but yes, you're right. It was a convenient way to plant question marks in the reader's mind. Like, well, is this a thing that kids have invented, or is this an actual thing to be worried about for these characters?
It was so nostalgic. I loved it being set in camp. It was really great.
Where did you go to camp?
Well, I went down the road really from in here in Texas, which was and we had no air conditioning. So it was
Wow.
It was like it was called Camp Valverde, and I just went like a couple summers when I was like 10, but very like impactful as a girl, and sleeping under the stars, hearing coyotes really close, always learning that you shouldn't be afraid of the coyotes because you just need to make a lot of noise and they'll go away. But it's helpful as an adult to know those things.
That's true.
I hope this is some encouragement to you, Liz, and I feel the same way. Allison wrote, my favorite books of the year are never from authors that come out with a book a year, and I could not agree more. So they make it a little more special when it takes longer.
They're all lauding your speed in writing, so feel free to take your time.
I don't think I could write faster even if I wanted to. So thank you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so when I talked to this group today who was discussing the book, which shout out to the currently reading group who have written so much about this book. Everyone wants to know that ending. You know, that was. Is it? Do you feel like it's controversial? Have you heard it? I thought it was utterly perfect, but I'd be interested to hear what other people thought. And was there ever an alternative ending?
There were lots of alternative endings. I mean, I genuinely had to get to know the characters in the family before I understood what had happened to Barbara. And once I came up with the idea that she would have had a brother who'd gone missing too, also what had happened to Bear. And, I played around with all sorts of things, and anything that readers have speculated about, probably I also speculated about. Is Bear still alive? That was a big one for a while. Is, did Jacob Sluter actually have something to do with either one of their disappearances? What did somebody in the family, was somebody in the family abusing one or both children? That was one that came up a lot for me. And it just ended up not being anything I was interested in, like, bringing into the world. That's the only way I can describe it. Not to say there's not a lot of dark things in this book, but I think there are certain things that I just didn't want to write. And that was one. And so, yes, I played around with all different ideas. Ultimately, I decided that the most satisfying ending thematically was to have Barbara be completely self-reliant in a way that the Van Laars don't want her to be. They think they want to be self-reliant. They've named their own home self-reliance, but it's only as long as it's the brand of self-reliance that they condone. It's not Barbara's brand of self-reliance. And so it felt very right to me and very satisfying that Barbara and TJ would have come up with this way to ensure that Barbara was able to make some decisions by herself, or at least be sort of well protected until she was ready to make a decision about her life. And also that Judy would come upon her and would make the decision not to prioritize, to choose fame over honor. Unlike her older colleague, La Rochelle, who did the exact opposite 14 years earlier. So it just kind of fit all the themes of the novel, and I ran with it.
I have to say, as a bookseller, I'm thankful that there wasn't the child abuse angle, which makes books harder to sell.
Yeah, and I do think there is absolutely a place for it in literature, especially I think a lot of people are working through something or maybe processing something personal when they're writing it, and I think there needs to be a space for that. But for me, it always, because it fit with no theme that I was trying to write about, it felt prurient, or it felt cheap to me to have that be part of the novel. It didn't feel right for the book, and so I took a different path.
So the other part of the ending that I think we all found so interesting was that Barbara was left on her own for so long when TJ had to go back, and just, hey, if you get hungry, you can hunt deer. Here's a gun. And did you find that reckless, or do you think this was just also our children are bubble wrapped these days? The very idea of leaving a child like this with no way to get help seems so foreign to us.
I think TJ is a very tough customer and does not suffer fools gladly, and knew that she could have done it, and knew that she had trained Barbara to be able to do it. And I also think, to be fair, Barbara could swim across she could swim across the body of water pretty easily, and walk out into out of the wilderness if she truly needed help. I also think that there's something different, I think the way that the Hewitts think of children is different than the way that we think of children today. I think at 13, Barbara would have been considered capable of, sort of taking care of herself in the way that an adult might be able to take care of themselves. And another source of inspiration for the book was that show Alone, which I watched obsessively while I was writing this book. And has anyone ever seen that? I love
Yes,
that
my
show.
family, we watched that during COVID, which
It was, yeah, I think I watched it during COVID too. And I think parts of it made their way into this novel as well. Highly recommend it. It is a good family watch.
yes.
No.
Yeah.
I would love to hear, Liz, if Barbara was real and alive today, what would she be doing?
I mean, I don't know. She loved music. Maybe she'd be involved in music in some way. I think it's also fine if you as readers want to imagine that for yourselves. Yeah, I think she's cool. I think she's a cool person. I knew kids like her growing up who were very self-possessed and really understood who they were from a very young age. And some of them were lucky enough to be born into families that appreciated that about them, and some of them were not. And I think Barbara, unfortunately, was not lucky enough to be born into a family that would value her for her uniqueness.
Well, I guess I don't know if you've wrapped up your tour, how many more dates you have, but I would love to hear how that went. I guess it is different than in 2020. And tell us a little bit about being picked by Jimmy Fallon. I voted for you.
Oh, thank you so much. That felt like a real community effort. People were texting me that like their grandma had voted 300 times, and it was very sweet. It was so cute. All of my friends and family came out of the woodwork. So for those who I don't know if everybody would have heard this, Jimmy Fallon runs a book club and on the Tonight Show. And the way he does it is a little different. Rather than just like choosing one book himself, he usually has his audience vote on, he presents I think there were like 6 books in this case, and viewers can vote on which of the books they want to read. And the voting was open for like 24 or 48 hours or something. And I've never spent more time online in my life because my publisher and I and everybody I knew were just reposting and, posting the link to vote. And it actually was very sweet. And I was thrilled to win. Partly I was as thrilled for my publisher as I was for myself, because they really poured their heart and soul into getting out the vote. And I have a wonderful young publicist who hasn't been working at my publisher for a long time. And this was like her baby, and she was more invested than I was. And she was the one who called me to tell me the news. And it was just like a very sweet moment. So yeah, it was cool.
So I have a fun fact. Both of my boys were on Jimmy Fallon for a video of them that went viral.
You're kidding. What can you post it in the chat, or can you tell me about it, or can you?
Well, when my
I'm
oldest,
laughing because I know what it is.
Yeah.
my oldest son turned 16, he took his younger brother, who was 14, to a basketball game, and they were sitting right behind Coach Kim Mulkey while she was being interviewed, and my 16-year-old punched my 14-year-old.
Oh, no.
And in a compromise, in a funny way.
Yes.
And as only you can imagine what 2 boys would be doing.
Right.
And the video went viral.
Yeah.
Like 600,000 views back in 2015.
Okay.
So Jimmy Fallon caught a hold of it, and yeah, so we have a connection, Liz, not just our name.
Amazing. I'll ask him if he remembers that video.
That was real special. So
yeah.
yeah, I'll have to find the video at some point, but that was
very
you
relatable.
can actually Google it.
I'm sure.
And it's still there. So
she's never been prouder as a mother.
I'm sure.
Yes, having to explain to my parents that was fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. So do we want to, Alice, do you want to do the Q&A for anybody have any questions?
Yes, if you have any questions, we kind of went over, Mary Ellen's was a little bit about how, Liz, how you envision when Judy goes back after seeing Barbara. If you had ideas, or if it's more just like up to the reader. So she can't say she saw Barbara, but what happens to the suspects of Barbara's disappearance? If you had any thoughts.
Oh, well, I think there's sort of, some of them get their comeuppance, but just for other things. John Paul, for example, is taken to task for his assault on Louise. Some of the Van Laars are taken to task for obstruction of justice, etc. So it's important to me, both in this book and in Long Bright River, to acknowledge that those in positions of power often get lesser sentences, or often are let off the hook in ways that people without much power or capital are not. And I think that's true of the Van Laars as well. And yet, they also did get some justice served to them. Part of that might be because it is 1975, it's not 1961, and there are new, there's sort of some new life in the state police, for example.
Jennifer had a question about it being set in the 1970s, where there's no social media or internet. Did that give you a big advantage as far as helping the story?
Yeah, it was not possible to Google, like what happened to Bear Van Laar, or to read Reddit threads about his
Right.
disappearance or whatever. That's for sure. What is interesting is that a couple of people have asked about the lack of cell phones and technology, and what I know about the Adirondacks is that there are still very few places where you can get a Wi-Fi signal or a cell phone signal. Our cabin has no cell phone service, nothing reaches us, and we have a landline, which my kids are fascinated by. And we can't get Wi-Fi because there was maybe 2 years where we were able to get like satellite service, and then the company repurposed the satellite for Canada. And so it's not even an option anymore, which I kind of love. And so in that way, I know what it is to not have cell phones when I'm up there, or internet, because we really don't have it. And so that was easy to imagine.
That has to be really refreshing.
Oh, Kai found the video. Oh my gosh. That's so funny.
Enjoy,
good.
guys.
I was going to be talking about that tonight. And okay,
I'm
so
gonna make sure I copy this right now.
Yeah.
Control
Just-
C. Okay.
it really was. I don't think I've ever laughed quite so hard in my entire life. And it was a really good lesson for my boys that how quickly something can go viral. And at least this was for something funny and not horrifying.
That's so true. It's sort
Yeah.
of like the test was proven. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So I know you say you write slowly. We're not going to expect anything for you for a few years, but do you have anything that you're working on? Anything you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, Long Bright River is going to be a series on Peacock in 2025, and I'm involved with that, and that's been announced already, so I can say that. I have a couple of other books under option, including The God of the Woods, but it's just, that process is very long. And just because something's under option does not mean that it will become a TV show. But there's a chance, and I'll be working on that as well. And I am in the very early stages of writing another novel, but I have told nobody about it, not even my husband or my family. So
We won't tell. We won't tell.
I know, right? We're just a great community to share, though, right?
Well, and I'd love to know what books you love, maybe some of your inspirational authors or books that you love or recommend to other people.
Yeah. I think The Remains of the Day by Ishiguro is a perfect novel. I would change nothing about it. I reread it frequently. I think Lost in the City by Edward P. Jones was the first book of short stories that really inspired me in terms of writing about place and how to make a place feel extremely specific and extremely universal all at once. Those are set in Washington, D.C., which is where Jones grew up. And I read an interview with him about Lost in the City where he talked about the book that had inspired him in part was Dubliners by James Joyce.
Mm.
And that too is a book. I see those books as, kind of a line of many authors being inspired by other authors who are very, very obsessed with place, and I would consider myself among them. I love, I'm going to give a big shout out to a bunch of Philly authors. We have a wonderful community of primarily women writers of fiction here in Philadelphia, and we're all friends with each other, and we all boost each other, and we're pals, and we hang out. Sarah Novich, who wrote True Biz, is a good friend of mine. Asali Solomon, who wrote The Days of Aphrodite, is a good friend. Emma Eisenberg, who wrote Housemates, is a good friend. Annie Leontis, who just wrote a work of nonfiction called Sex with a Brain Injury, which is a really fascinating look at her brain after a traumatic brain injury, a series of traumatic brain injuries, actually, and what it did to like her partnership with her wife. There are so many of us. We are legion. Kylie Reed lived in Philadelphia for a while. She was here when she published Such a Fun Age. Carmen Machado lived in Philadelphia and is a good friend. So we're all just, I love the Philly's literary community because there's simultaneously a lot of us and few enough of us that we all kind of know each other and rep each other hard.
I love that. Thank
Cool.
you
Yeah.
for sharing those.
Awesome.
I
Well,
see my PVR is exploding. I appreciate
yes,
it.
I saw that too. I was like, I love it.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully you'll add this to your TBR, which is our next book club next month is, and I think Elizabeth has a visual for you.
Yes.
Is one of my favorites this year called I Hope This Finds You Well by Natalie Sue. This is a debut novel. It is so clever. I would say it's like a mashup of The Office and Anxious People. The main character hates her job, hates people she works with. And she has a habit of when she emails them, she'll email them like, yes, I'll be, that file will be on your desk. And then in white letters, she'll write an insult to them and send it. So it's satisfying to her. They can't see it. But one day she forgets to turn the font white and it goes out regular font. And so she gets called into HR and they're like, we're very concerned about you and feel like you're threatening to your, coworkers, and we're going to have to monitor your computer usage and put a program on your computer so we can see what you're doing. So once they do that, she actually figures out that she can read everyone's emails and everyone's chats. So it opens up a new world for her, and the characters are so clever. I would say this is like a light book with some real grit underneath too. I'm really, really, really excited to talk to her, and this book is so excellent. I am going to post, actually Kai did already for us. She posted the link to register. If any of y'all would like to join us on September 10th at 7 p.m. to register on our Zoom, and then the link to buy the book from Fabled. I'm thrilled. And this book is getting hyped too, which is so satisfying as a bookseller to like read a book and be like, this is excellent. And then the rest of the world agrees. So I would love to see y'all there and encourage you to read it. And so, yeah. But thank you so much, Liz.
Thank you for having me.
Just
really,
a dream.
really good conversation. Thank you.
This was a dream come true. I have been a huge fan since the beginning, and we're cheering you on hard here at Fabled in Waco.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to watch your sons on video now. Bye.
Oh yeah, they're now grown up. The oldest one is now married, and he turned out okay. So
okay, good. This is giving me hope because my own children are feral and they're 5 and 8. And
this is true. Yeah, exactly.
One day you'll be okay. All right, good.
All right, y'all have a good night.
Thank you guys. We'll see you next month. Bye.